Exactly how hard do the Charlotte Hornets need to hit the refresh button? We'll preview the Toronto Raptor games as well. All today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. That's Doug Branson shaking his head. I didn't expect that. You can find him on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com, and you can listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. All right, Doug, what's going on? I didn't realize we had a problem right at the beginning of the show. What's up?
Well, I'm just offended. I am personally offended that we are having this the conversation that we are about to have. I'm offended that we are having it on December 8th. The, keep everything together or blow it up conversation. This is too early for this conversation. I'm offended that you are bringing your hot take radio professional sensibilities to this respected podcast, but here we are. So let's have the conversation.
Well, that's your first problem. You think this is a respected podcast. If you just lowered your expectations, then you would understand what the content level is. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. You're right, Doug. Here I am coming to you live from Boston once again, except a different hotel room because they switched it up a couple of times on me.
Okay. If we do this conversation, you have to do it in a radio voice. You have to say, we are live here in Boston talking about whether the Hornets should blow it up.
Yeah, thanks for listening to Locked On Hornets, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're live from Boston, the Weston Media Row Army-Navy game. It's going to be great. Thanks for joining us. If you want to text in, call in, you can do so via Doug's subtext.
On the Morris Air text line.
Like it. Yeah, you're nasally. You have a cold. You need some Afrin when you do radio. But currently my setup, by the way, is because it was I watched that video back yesterday, Doug. I hated the camera angle. It was so cringy to me. I know you're on the road. It does not matter. The rules don't apply to us anymore. But I hated the camera angle. I like this much better. So what I've done is I've taken there's the bin with the trash can and the recycle bins in it. And so I've turned it upside down. I put my computer on top of it. And now we have a much more flattering camera angle, a better one for the people that don't have to look up at my bugs anymore. So
speaking of trash cans, should the Hornets blow it up or keep everything together?
Should we throw everything in the trash can? Yeah, speaking of radio, we had this convo a little bit yesterday. I saw it on the Kyle Bailey show. There were, listeners engaging with just how much do you clean house? Does everybody need to leave? And it might have been Rachel. Shout out to Rachel for like the second time in a week and a half or so. You've been coming with some good content. I think she might have made the BMW joke. I'm not sure, but I'll give you credit even if you didn't make it up. So it's, hey, you can clean house except for LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, Mark Williams, BMW, Ball, Miller, Williams. That's it. Just keep the car in the garage, but everything else needs to go. All those boxes, you hoarders, get rid of everything else except for the BMW. And I was wondering, okay, is that what this team should do? Like that's a lot to get rid of. Fred Whitfield's gone, part because of the health issues that he had been suffering over the last 18 months. But also we expect more front office changes, more business changes to come about. Mitch Kupchak, if we just want to discuss basketball operations, we don't expect Mitch Kupchak to be here. We would not bet on Steve Clifford being here another season, maybe in season, but certainly not one after this one is complete. Terry Rozier's been on the trade block. People have been dying to trade Gordon Hayward. Even if he doesn't get traded, Doug, he's in the last year of his contract. So how much do we clean house here? Like how much spring cleaning do we really need to do?
I understand the sentiment of fans who want to see a lot of the players on this roster go to other teams. Gordon Hayward, Terry Rozier, some of the bigger contracts, but also some of the, I think, minor pieces that they've brought in. Nick Richards, PJ Washington. They're not seeing enough out of these players to justify their continued place alongside the players that they would protect, the BMW at this point. I understand that sentiment. The problem with the idea of moving on from a vast majority of this roster is that you do have to have some sense that you can bring back more, honestly, like more talent than you're sending out. And do you have confidence that the franchise would be able to do that? Because, you know, I don't think a full-on rebuild would be good for LaMelo Ball. I mean, they're sort of stuck in this weird place where they've got to find ways to acquire more talent in order to get Ball to a place where he can play some meaningful games, because they just signed him to a max contract. Like, I get all the concerns about his injury history, but look, you're stuck with LaMelo Ball. You've got to put as much talent around him as possible and get him to these moments that Tyrese Halliburton had in this in-season tournament. These narrative moments, these moments in front of national TV cameras, and in playoff situations, not play-in situations, but playoff situations. You've got to do that. And if you get rid of all the talent and you can't secure better talent, which, I don't know, I mean, that would be up to a new front office at that point. How confident are you that this team could pull that off? I'm not sure. So I think this team needs a retooling more than in terms of the roster than a house cleaning.
Oh, yeah. Retool, not rebuild. Also, this is hardcore radio podcast today. Retool, rebuild, but you're right. I mean, if you have both of your young stars that you hope to be young stars, in LaMelo, who has turned into one, but health is not keeping him on the court, and Brandon Miller, who you hope to turn into a superstar as well, those guys are easy. Mark Williams, a little more up for debate, but Mark Williams being that guy that was also a first-round pick in a second year, showing some good things with inconsistency, I could understand wanting him as well. But everyone else, does that affect the way that you can build going towards next year? Like, I wonder if, you know, Miles Bridges on the qualifying offer, he's not making a lot of money right now. Is that someone that you wouldn't mind getting rid of, despite them being so close, LaMelo and Miles, and also just kind of washing your hands of the off-the-court situation? You're not going to trade him. He's just going to leave, and you're not going to get anything in return. But also, it just might be nice for this team, new ownership, to move on to something different if Miles and LaMelo and some of these players that have been the core for a while haven't gone anywhere past a play-in game or a play-in blowout here. So with Gordon already being done after this season, this is going to, I wonder if they don't even have to try all that hard for there to be a lot of turnover going into next year. Especially with Mitch Kupchak just not changing the team all that much. It's going to be the most dramatic change that we've seen in the last 3 years, Doug, because Cody Martin was the big free agent acquisition 2 years ago, and that was a re-signing. Dennis Smith Jr. was the big new addition. They got rid of him, and now we're talking about Frank Ntilikina, who we haven't seen suit up, and all the rookies that they've drafted. It's going to be the biggest change, and I wonder if, because it's the biggest, it being a low bar, but because it's the biggest change, is that enough for you to feel comfortable that this team actually did something going into next season?
Well, and this front office has really invested almost exclusively in the NBA draft as the means by which they would improve as a roster, and then internal player development. And they've been selling us the past few seasons that this team had enough talent on the roster to compete for a playoff spot. And, you know, look, obviously you can look at injuries and go, yes, there is a built-in excuse. But I think also we've had enough time in little pockets of this healthy roster to have serious questions about whether over the course of a reasonably healthy NBA season that this team legitimately has enough talent. And so I do think that the Hornets should go through a retooling where they examine some of these auxiliary pieces, and instead of picking around the edges in the offseason to bring in guys like Frank Ntilikina as like a wing defender or backup point guard, they go out and, you know, exchange the JT Thors, as much as it breaks my heart to say that, the Bryce McGowans, the second rounders, the Cody Martin, is there a way to separate from that and find a legitimate backup center that could offer something different than Mark Williams offers you? Something, a more physical center.
Well, you want physicality
shoot.
And shooting, right? Yeah, those would be the two things right now.
Yeah, I mean, three-point shooting. I mean, consistent three-point shooting. Somebody that, you know, imagine a 36 36 to 38% three-point shooter on 5 3-pointers a game subbed in for Bryce McGowan's. That would make a considerable difference on this roster. Somebody that you could depend on. Hey, that guy can score like 12 to 15 off the bench every single night. That would be a significant upgrade for this roster. It's not going to take I don't think you have to go out there and find, a superstar and convince them to sign a contract. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't even think that's what you need. You just need to go out and find legitimate NBA talent that you didn't happen to draft, but that are really good players. There are a lot of good players out there that will need landing spots come next year, whether that be via trade or free agency. And I think the Hornets and whatever the front office looks like has to give up on this idea that this roster has enough talent and actually go and find the talent.
Yeah, I've been looking for a team to use as a comparison, and I think I found one. Let's move on and reveal that team on the other side. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
And maybe reevaluate the training staff, too.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Yeah, we got to talk injuries again, except this time, not even the Greensboro Swarm is safe from injuries, and so it has infiltrated our G League.
It's spreading.
Yeah, please stay 6 feet apart from spreading ankle injuries. We don't want that anymore. But I'm also going to reveal the team that I think maybe something the Hornets could follow, use as a blueprint. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers, and instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then you watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball with the Specials League. And so you could pick a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made, maybe plus receptions. Again, if you want to stay here in the city of Charlotte, Chuba Hubbard rushing yards, Jonathan Mingo receiving yards might be something you want to pick more than on top of Brandon Miller points scored, Terry Rozier with LaMelo continuing to be out. Those are a couple of options for you. And Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Doug, when we were figuring out what the Hornets should do, just how hard they need to hit the refresh button, if it's one of those things where the page isn't loading and you just keep pressing, and then you just have a clean slate all over, the computer is saying, we don't have anything for you, this is a blank screen, how hard do we need to hit that refresh button? I was looking at some other teams to figure out young franchise that had a star in place. Maybe they had vaulted into that superstardom or not. They also had some younger players around that high player that you drafted. And I found the Houston Rockets, who we've mentioned a couple times. And so This is the model would be at least what worked for them to get to 9-9, 500 this year. It was to go hire a coach that ended in controversy with the Boston Celtics, but they hired Ime Udoka, who had success with the Boston Celtics. Okay. So he's the coach. They completely flipped their defensive identity around. I mean, at the beginning of the season, they were playing very well on that end of the floor. And that's despite having a center in Alperen Şengün, who isn't great at that end. Offensively, you can run your offense through him. He's a great passer. We know that he's a talented guy. You know that you drafted Jalen Green, number 2 overall, just a few years back. And then once we get to free agency, there was not a lot of money, allocated to a bunch of free agents this year. But there were a couple. And the couple that did make more than we thought their value was just so happened to sign with the Houston Rockets. They gave Fred VanVleet a lot of dough. And I think maybe Toronto might have tried to keep him if it wasn't for the contract. They gave Dylan Brooks a lot of money. And so they bring that physicality that you want. They bring that dog mentality. I think both those guys got that dog in them, Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks. And you spend a ton of money with a big old change just with the makeup of your roster, but it's not at the top end, right? It's not like Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet. Maybe a little VanVleet, but you get the idea. And here they are at 500, really taking a leap forward. It's harder to see dramatic changes from one year to another in the NBA like you can in the NFL, but I don't know how dramatic it is, but it's certainly a big old difference down there in Houston.
Yeah, and don't forget about the wily vet, Jeff Green. I wasn't listening terribly hard, so if you said that, I apologize. But, yeah, don't forget about the wily vet.
You got that one right. I didn't say his name.
Okay, good. Yeah, 37-year-old Jeff Green still making it happen for Houston. Look, this isn't hard. This is why, I feel like some listeners and viewers have been confused or I don't know, even annoyed by some of my frustration that I've had over the past couple of seasons with this front office, so the way I keep bringing it up. But with the Houston thing really set me off. And maybe over the course of this 82-game season, things level out. I've been reticent to even mention the Rockets or sort of bathe in that because you never know how those things are going to turn out. But it sure looks here in the early returns that this whole thing is really simple. If you have money to spend, go and spend it on guys. Maybe you might have to overpay, and that's fine. Put some good talent around your young talent. Watch the wins roll in, and that young talent that they have there is going. If the Houston Rockets maintain this, they get to the playoffs. That young talent is going to get so much experience from that post, even if they get knocked out in the first round. So much experience. And I think what's been most frustrating with this franchise is that they've been stuck in this idea of we don't want to go back to the, Rich Cho era of getting to the first round and not being able to move past that. We want to build something sustainable. And in trying to do that, they've built nothing. They built nothing.
Yeah, and we'll see, with the Rockets being 9-9, it's an 18-game sample. And the Hornets, Doug, they did try. They did pay Gordon Hayward, overpaid him for a guy that was supposed to come in and help. They did overpay Terry Rozier, who has helped, especially in times that they've needed him to step up because of injuries. But it just hasn't worked out at the end. And you wonder if this is the Charlotte Hornets. We're actually a top 4 seed when everybody's healthy, but then they certainly fall into the play-in tournament after it's all said and done. That could happen with the Rockets, but they still try to go make something happen. They still brought in some rotation players, not top-end guys, but some guys that are rotation and high-end rotation players that might help the Rockets reach the playoff promised land, maybe at the end, play in to get to the playoffs. So we'll see. Another thing that the Rockets have done is they've drafted high, at least. We'll see about the hit on Jalen Green, Jabari Smith going into a second year, Appler and Şengün, right? They've got a lot of young players. Well, the Hornets, they used more draft picks than we expected them to this past offseason. And Nick Smith Jr. was one of those selections. People like Nick Smith Jr. You and I both do. We understand why Steve Clifford might not be playing him as much, but he's fun and he's a bucket, and we're excited to see what his career holds. He went down to Greensboro on assignment, and Nick Smith Jr. had a bad ankle sprain. At least it looked bad. I shouldn't say that it was confirmed bad, but that thing was iced up. It was heavily taped. I believe he was on crutches leaving the arena, if I'm not mistaken.
Wasn't putting any weight on the ankle. Reports were.
It looks bad, Doug.
Yeah, and the way he turned it, it was as he was coming down, he stepped on a foot. So there was some momentum. It's not one of those situations where you kind of just step back and turn. There was momentum as he fell to the ground, and then the ankle turned. So you're hoping that's not like high ankle sprain, because those tend to be lengthy recoveries. He looked to be, in the pictures that I saw, he looked to be smiling, looked to be in good spirits. He's young. He'll bounce back. Listen, he's got plenty of ankle injuries ahead as long as he stays with this franchise, buddy. Might as well just get one of them out of the way right now while you're young and can bounce back a little bit quicker than when you're older. But yeah, it's just, I don't know what you say at this point. Lots of ankle injuries across the league, by the way. It's easy because we just watch Hornets games obsessively to think like, why does this only happen to the Hornets? And certainly it's happening a lot more than other teams. But ankle injuries are just an epidemic right now. And, a lot of old heads, I listen to Sirius XM, and they've got a couple of guys on there that played a long time ago, making comments on what's happening, and you'll hear them talk about this and say, look, these guys are all wearing low tops. They're not wearing shoes to protect the ankles. They don't tie them up tight enough, and it seems to just be something that young players don't like to do, tie up the shoes really tight, protect the ankles, and you are seeing, I think, more ankle injuries. At least anecdotally, it feels like there are more ankle injuries now than there used to be.
Yeah, and maybe you're right. I have not seen the other ankle injuries from other NBA franchises. It's not the first time, Doug, that it's been a big problem in just 1 year's worth of time with this franchise. It's happened a couple. I remember making the joke when it was during the pandemic, or maybe like 2021, when the Charlotte Hornets had a bunch of ankle sprains then, and the injury report, I might still have the screenshot, and I tweeted it out. It was, left ankle sprain, right ankle sprain, left ankle sprain. There was like one injury report heading into a game, and it was like, hey, we need to take the vaccination so we can stop getting these ankle sprains. That was right then, and now here it is once more hurting us in 2023. That's what's frustrating. Yes, it would be mad frustrating for the last 2 years to have this kind of injury history. It was all over the place last season. LaMelo was the one suffering a lot of ankle problems, but this year everybody is suffering ankle problems. This also happened like 2 years prior. This also happened when people were going through these ankle injuries. It has to be more with the Hornets. I would make a blind bet on that. I might lose, but it certainly feels like I would win on that bet.
Well, and honestly, I hope that this new ownership group, if they do eventually clean house, and that includes the training staff, that there is some thought put into this. I hope they're not sitting there going, well, bleep happens, that this is just a statistical anomaly. This is just something that, we're going through, but it won't be like that next year. Instead of thinking that's been the whole sort of ethos of the Charlotte Hornets for too long. Well, it won't be like this next year. How about we put some thought into it and say, hey, is there anything we can do? Is there any communication that we can have with the players that can, maybe try to prevent this? Maybe it's successful, maybe it's not. But I hope that there's some idea of I think we're fighting through some phlegm injuries here.
Yeah, I'm a little bit mine's a minor, phlegm sprain. I
tried to fight through it. I did the best I could there, but I had to stop. All right, so hopefully they're thinking about it. That's all I'm saying. I hope somebody there is looking at this situation and going, this is ridiculous. Maybe there's something we can do.
I found that injury update that I was talking about that I referenced from a couple of years ago. It was April 15th. The injury report heading into a Brooklyn game on April 16th, 2021. So just 2 seasons ago. Here's the injury update going into that game. Ball was out with a wrist fracture. Mm-hmm. Darling, remember Nate Darling? Darling out with a ankle sprain. Graham, quad contusion. Hayward, foot sprain. Monk, ankle sprain. Washington, ankle sprain. Wanamaker, ankle sprain. It's so many. It's 5. It's in going into what, and now it's here again. What is happening?
By the way, good news for book night. might get because we saw Nick Smith Jr. get some sporadic minutes. He was getting sprinkled in there even when they weren't getting trounced. So you wonder now. Actually, I don't wonder. I don't think he's going to play book night. I think he's just going to shorten up the rotation even more. We're going to see 6, 7, 8-man rotations. But there's at least an opportunity. And if you think one individual person is hexing the Hornets, this is kind of like a game of Clue. Who's doing it? I think it might be Colonel Book Night in the library with a voodoo doll with little things poking out of ankles, because there have been a lot of injuries around this wing rotation that would allow Book Night to get in there and get some minutes.
Yeah,
but so far Clifford is resisting.
Yeah, coincidence that James Bouknight doesn't have an ankle injury right now, although he did. Yeah, what was his injury? It was a leg injury, I think. So, anyways, yeah, a little bit different. James, we're on to you. All right, coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Doing it well.
We'll preview the Toronto Raptors game, and we have some holdover segments. We might reveal it in this segment. We might reveal it in a future show. Who knows? You're going to have to stick around and find out. This episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. I know we come to talk sports, and we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just for a minute talk about preparing for real life? If you found yourself cut off from modern medical care and treatment on an outdoor adventure, in a natural disaster, or in a foreign country,
in Greensboro,
you would need to have a plan. Yes, exactly. That's true. With the Jace, come on, Jace Case, get on it. With the Jace Case, you can secure your own supply of basic antibiotics with ease and peace of mind. The J's Case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinus infections, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Doug, you asked me to stop you yesterday as you were going down the schedule once I heard an opponent that didn't terrify me. And I almost ruined the bit because the first game on that list was Toronto. And this is a team that it's like if you go to the national NBA pundits, they would point to Toronto as one of the more intriguing teams to watch the rest of the way because they have OG Anunoby. He would bring back quite a bit of draft capital. They have Pascal Siakam, who won a championship, had Pascal a very good, back and going back and forth. So they're under 500. They lose Fred VanVleet. What are they going to do? And so here they are under 500. I feel like this is a gettable game. Yes, even if they're not favored, it's a gettable game. But after that, that's when I was not able to stop you for quite some time. What are you watching for in this game against the Raptors?
Well, I'll tell you exactly why I'm terrified of the Toronto Raptors. They still do play a good brand of defensive basketball. I'm even more terrified after that Chicago game because the Hornets offense, despite some shooting struggles and despite LaMelo Ball being out, the Hornets offense was something that they could count on. It was the defense that we were talking about. It was the rebounding that we were talking about. It was just simple things like getting back in transition, just running back. That's what we were talking about. And then all the offense went away for the Hornets against Chicago. So that scares me a little bit. But so I just mentioned 2 of the things that the Hornets have not done well, which is get back into transition and get defensive rebounds. Well, 2 of the things that Toronto does extremely well, they don't shoot the basketball well at all. They're like one of the bottom teams, along with the Charlotte Hornets, in three-point accuracy. But what they do well is they attack you in transition, and not just steals. They attack probably better than any other team in the league off live rebounds. They're effective when they do it, and they're one of the better putback teams. Offensive rebounds. They crash the glass, and when they do, they usually, similar thing that we've seen with Chicago and with Minnesota. It's not just about, hey, I'm going to put it back, I'm going to get an offensive rebound and I'm going to throw it back up and get 2. No, they kick it out, they rotate, they put you in scramble mode, and that's when they can get, the few threes that they do get can be generated off those types of plays. And so they do 2 things that the Hornets don't tend to really try to defend all that well, and that scares me.
Yeah, plus this is the MO of Toronto, a little bit like Orlando too, is they just got a lot of length, they got a lot of versatility, and they have an answer for a lot of different stuff that you throw at them from an offensive standpoint. They have the answers defensively. So.
I'll tell you what they don't have, though. I just looked this up. They don't have more than 2 players who have an above-average points per shot attempt, which is just essentially your offensive efficiency. Only 2 players. One is Jakob Poeltl, who is 88th percentile in points per shot attempt at 143.1. The other is OG Anunoby at 119.6. So look, this team is not going to score a lot of points. They're also not going to let you score a lot of points. I think they've played in a lot of close games this season. This will be probably one that goes down to the wire. Do the Hornets have enough clutch scoring between Terry Rozier, who has looked really good in those clutch moments. With LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges looked good in clutch moments. But for some weird reason, has kind of shrunk a little bit, I think, in the moment without LaMelo Ball. I would love to see a 35-point Miles Bridges game tonight. I think that's what the Hornets need, a little bit of injection of offensive firepower, and I think Miles Bridges should be the player that they count on to provide that. Not Gordon Hayward. I mean, thank you, Gordon Hayward, for 12 points in the first quarter and 19 points in the first half. Where were you in the second half? But that's not what they need. They need the players that give them elite advantages offensively, getting to the rim, and that's Miles Bridges and Terry Rozier. They need those 2 guys to be special.
Well, yeah, and even at the beginning, when there were a couple of rough shooting nights for Miles Bridges, 6 of 13 isn't bad, but when he was 3 of 13, and then there was also a 5 of 12 game a little bit earlier this year, the 3 of 13 contest against Boston, they won, but he was also the guy that hit that 3-point shot in order to help them get to overtime. And so even a bad shooting performance was masked because he did come up in the clutch, but we haven't seen the monster scoring game from him, except for that 33-pointer against Washington. And, it's Washington, but we would like to see, it'd be great to see Miles, do something as the number one. And This is right. And I think you and I are both saying this. Miles has been very good since he's come back. He's been very efficient, and he's been offensively really helping this squad out. With LaMelo, so if we're saying Miles is the second best player on this team as currently constructed, when LaMelo's out, we need him to be a 1 in order to get wins.
Exactly.
Even if he and this would be a great game for us to see that. So can he be that guy that is the 1 that gets us 30? Can you get us 30 tonight? And if they do, then a team that is not favored might have that shot to win.
Exactly. With LaMelo Ball on the floor, it's okay for Miles Bridges to be good to very good. Without him on the floor, they need him to be great on both ends of the floor. Maybe it's unfair to ask that. They need him to be a dominant scorer, and they need him to defend the best guy on the other end in terms of wing play. And if Mark Williams can't play tonight because of the lower back contusion, they also need him to be a dominant rebounder. That is super unfair to ask of one player. Guess what? Doesn't matter. That's the deal. Same thing with Terry Rozier. They need him to be the best playmaker and the best clutch scorer. That's where the Hornets are right now. They have to ask unfair things of their best players. And look, if you're Miles Bridges, man, happened again. Tried to fight through it. Going to continue to fight through it. If you're Miles Bridges, you're looking for a contract next year. You need to have games like this where you do it all for a team. And LaMelo Ball will come back at some point and will overshadow his ability to do that. So he needs to take advantage of these opportunities and have big performances, because you're right. Points per shot attempt-wise, he's well above average. Assist percentage, well above average for forwards in the league. He's doing a lot of the things that you want him to do. Fine. Good. Need him to be great.
This is a hardcore radio podcast today. He's good, but not great.
He's been good so far, but they need him to be great.
Yeah. Your radio, you go to 1940s. This is black and white television if you're doing the color commentary, or you're actually out there on the TV screen. And on radio, it's a little fuzzy. We're going to the AM dial and it goes in and out. But that's Doug Branton's radio voice. You can go see him and his writing voice on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. You can listen to me on WFNZ every weekday, 12 to 3 p.m. Wes and Walker, Sports Radio 92.7 FM. That'll do it. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods. That includes YouTube. Have a great weekend. Hopefully we're talking about a Hornets victory against the Raptors on Monday. We'll be there to recap it all, whatever happens tonight. Thanks again, and have a great weekend.